British Conservative MPs are giving up in droves ahead of the elections in early July, and this sheds light on the chances of success that politicians are calculating. One of the dropouts is a current minister. So in Great Britain, other prominent Conservative MPs announced on Friday that they would no longer stand in the parliamentary elections scheduled for July 4th, and Housing Minister Michael Gove, a sitting member of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's cabinet, announced on Friday that he would not run. After almost 20 years as an MP and more than a decade in the cabinet and 5 government departments, I have today made the decision to step down. That's what Gove wrote on the online service X. The former journalist served under 4 prime ministers as Minister of Education, Justice and Environment, among others. Under Sunak, he was Minister for Equal Opportunities, Housing and Communities. MPs and former ministers John Redwood and Greg Clark had previously announced that they would not stand in the election. The same was true of Craig McKinlay, who returned to the British Parliament to great applause after having his hands and feet amputated following blood poisoning. While the Eurosceptic Redwood simply stated that there were other things he would like to do, McKinlay cited doubts about the heavy workload as the reason. A total of 77 Conservative MPs have already announced their resignation from the British Parliament, and that is more than before the overwhelming victory of Labour politician Tony Blair in 1997, when 72 Conservative MPs threw in the towel. Ex-Prime Minister Theresa May and former Tory party leader Nadhim Zahawi also announced that they would not stand again in the election. And Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced July the 4th as the date for the parliamentary elections. You remember the wet as a poodle appearance there. The parties can nominate their candidates until June 7th, and the British Parliament has a total of 650 members. The Conservatives have had the majority there for 14 years, and this could change. The Tories are currently far behind the Labour Party in the polls. And Gove was Education Minister under David Cameron, but turned against his head of government in the 2016 Brexit campaign. He then supported Boris Johnson's efforts to become Tory leader and even applied for the post himself. In 2019, he became part of Johnson's cabinet, but was sacked by him before the government collapsed. The British Labour Party, on the other side, has banned its former party leader Jeremy Corbyn from running in the parliamentary election. And this quite controversial politician is running anyway. That means that the former head of the British Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, wants to run as an independent candidate in the upcoming parliamentary election. He announced on Friday morning that he would run for his constituency in the London district of Islington North. Corbyn was expelled from the Labour parliamentary group several years ago because of his handling of anti-Semitism. He is accused of not having taken decisive enough action against anti-Semitic tendencies in the party during his time as party leader from 2015 to 2020. And several Jewish MPs left the party in protest at the time. In the last general election in 2019, Labour suffered a defeat under Corbyn's leadership. And in a few weeks, Great Britain will now elect a new parliament, and the Labour Party is now led by Keir Starmer, and in opinion polls, his party has long been ahead of the ruling Conservatives. Sky News asked Starmer about his reaction to Corbyn's announcement. That is a matter for Corbyn, said Starmer. As Labour Party leader, he said from the beginning that he would take action against anti-Semitism in the party. That was my first promise and I have kept it, he said. That is why he decided that Corbyn would not stand as a Labour candidate in this election. Corbyn has been MP for Islington North for around 40 years. And as your MP, I will continue to be an independent voice for equality, democracy and peace, he said on social media. It is not yet known who Labour will put forward for the constituency when I'm filming this. The general election in Great Britain, as I said, will take place on July 4th, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced this last week, and the Prime Minister thus scheduled the election earlier than many had expected. Unlike here in Germany, in the United Kingdom, the Prime Minister can decide on the election date within a generous period of time. He must give notice at least 25 working days in advance. The opposition has been urging Sunak for months to finally set an election date. They accused him of delaying the election date as long as possible in view of the poor poll ratings, but that changed now. The electoral system is based on the majority voting system and not on something like the personalized proportional representation system that we have here in Germany. And that means that the candidate who receives the most votes in the constituency is elected. That's similar to what we call the first vote in Germany. The opponent's votes are gone regardless of how many they have collected. And that is because there is no second vote for the election of a party list, what we have here. The British system is called the first past the post system. And that means, in short, who forms the government depends on who has won the most constituencies and not on who has won the most votes. And many people find this unfair because small parties can thus practically never come to power. And I find this undemocratic, to be honest. The system has been criticized for decades but has never been reformed. And so we have a kind of a two-party system there, like in the United States. And that's the reason why usually either the Tories or Labour have been in power. Of course, there will no be big discussions as we have like with our so-called traffic light government at the moment that do nothing but discussing and arguing. But smaller parties have even almost no chance of winning seats in Parliament, and that's the problem. The British majority voting system sometimes even means that the party with the highest percentage nationwide does not necessarily get the most seats and therefore does not form the government. So that means that a party that just gets more constituencies but a lot of less votes overall is still the governing party there. We're talking about 650 seats again, and the winner must have at least 326 seats. But we've seen that with a majority that is not that big, like in the 2019 elections, the Tories had, if I remember correctly, 42%, but had a gigantic majority in Parliament. And we're about to see something similar, most probably. The polls are saying, if it comes to light like it is now, Labour might get between 43-45% of the vote. But as it seems, they will get, in that case, if everything comes true as they are talking about now, about something close to 2/3 of the parliament seats. And with less than 50% of the vote, getting so many parliament seats, everybody who just hears that must know that that doesn't sound very, very democratic. And so I can absolutely understand people that are talking about reforms in the electoral system and that they want changes there. But I talked about the coalition part. I have to give them that. Of course, there is usually, if there's not as much as infighting in the party as we've seen with the Conservatives for quite a while now, it brings you a stable government. Usually, not this time, but usually. And coalition governments are always more complicated than one party with an absolute majority. But still, the representation of the people is completely different. The parliament, with all its advantages and disadvantages, is supposed to show the will of the people, so to speak. And the representation that goes that far astray from what the people voted is not a real representation, to be honest. But if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.